But there is nonetheless still a logic to the economic development of capitalism because of its particular institutions, which are different than the feudal ones. And the Marxists argue that given that logic, socialism is something that is necessarily going to develop. So let's take the economic principles that capitalism puts in place. Of course, under feudalism, there was very little by way of property rights, or as to say, there was one person legally, the king, who owned all of the property, including all of the people, or there was a relatively small percentage of the population that was legal entitled to own property. Instead, what capitalism does is it enshrines the notion of private property. Everybody is allowed to, right, free to own property. In some cases, the property that existed under feudalism might be broken up. The huge landed estates that the aristocrats owned, or that the church owned, or that the king owned. When those individuals and groups are deposed, the huge amounts of property then are taken up and divided amongst people. And to the extent that that's done formally, there's a rough and ready equality in the division of labor, or of the division of the property that goes on. So we have private property that comes into existence, and that's an essential feature of capitalism. But we also have in capitalism a system of competition. Right? Those who own property are in competition with each other to try to increase the amount of property that they have. And there's a logic then to the development of competition in a capitalist society that the Marxists think is ironclad. Suppose, for example, we'll do this as a hypothetical experiment here, or as a thought experiment. Suppose we do have a society that is feudal. The king owns all of the land. And suppose there was a perfectly administered revolution in the capitalist direction. We go through and we abolish all of the class distinctions. That is to say, we make everyone equal in their rights. We make everyone free. Everyone is released from their class-based bondage situations. And we take all of the property that the king owned and we divide it up equally among everybody in the society. So we then have a new society that is perfectly free and perfectly equal. Well, what is necessarily then going to happen, though, if we have a private property system that capitalism then brings into case? Well, of course, people will make different decisions about how they're going to use their property. Some people will have better ideas than other people. Some people will have innovative ideas. Some people will be luckier than various other people. Some people will, of course, cheat and get away with it, and that will give them various sorts of advantages. So there will be all sorts of things that go on in the capitalist competition as people are using their private property. And what then is going to happen, though, is in the competition, there are going to be some people who are fairly successful at the capitalist competition. They will be winners, they will be amass more wealth, and there will be those who are losers, so to speak. They will make bad decisions, or they will have bad luck, right, or they will be victims of various sorts of underhanded practices by other people in that situation. So capitalism, the Marxists argue, is necessarily a zero-sum, or it's a system that generates a series of winners and a series of losers. Now what of course happens is if I, for example, am a loser, I don't know, suppose I make some bad decisions on my land and my crops are a failure for 3 years in a row, then I face bankruptcy. My only option when I face bankruptcy is to sell off my property or it's taken away from me. And so then I lose my property. Somebody else who did not make those same bad decisions or who had better luck, that person then has more assets available to him, so he's in a position to buy my property. But then the end result of that is that I'm a propertyless person, and that person, the other person now has twice as much property, say, so to speak. And my only option then, if I'm going to stay in existence, is to go to work for him. So the argument that the Marxists make is that the logic of capitalism generates then a class structure of its own. Those who are consistently winners become property owners, and the Marxists give the label bourgeois, or the bourgeoisie, right, as a class to those who, as a result of the logic of capitalism, end up being owners of property. And then those who are consistently losers, those who are not in a position then to maintain their own property but have to give up their property and then go to work for the bourgeoisie, those are the proletariat. And so what the Marxists argue is that we might start from a situation in which everyone is equal and free, but nonetheless we are going to evolve necessarily by the logic of capitalism into a situation where not everyone is equal and also not everyone is fully free anymore, because if the bourgeoisie own the property and the proletariat are going to work for them, then the proletariat, particularly when they're on the job, they have to do what the bourgeoisie say. These guys are the bosses, or these guys become the managers. These become the workers who have to do what we say. So we have within capitalism then the development of a hierarchy of its own sake. Now between these two classes there is necessarily going to be a conflict. And the conflict comes from competing economic interests. If I'm a member of the proletariat and I'm working for you, who is a member of the bourgeoisie, it's to my interest to earn more money, but it's to your interest to pay me less money. And so we have a conflict over wages. It's also the case that when I'm on the job, since I'm a human being, I don't necessarily like being told what to do, but you have the right and the power on the job to tell me what to do. So I feel a certain amount of resentment at being told what to do. But at the same time, we know there are a significant number of people in the bourgeoisie who kind of like looking down on people who are in the proletariat and enjoy telling them what to do. Now the conflict between the two classes starts off fairly gently in one generation, but what happens over the course of succeeding generations is the class conflict becomes exacerbated and more extreme. For example, if I am working for you and I'm making my my low wages, well, my kids, when they come along, I'm not going to be able to afford to send them to the first-rate schools that you can afford to send to your kids because you're a member of the bourgeoisie. So your kids will get better education than my kids. I might have to have my kids go to work at a younger age. You can afford the additional luxury of time to send your kids to college, and so forth. And so what that then means is economically, my kids will be disadvantaged relative to your kids in the next generation. And there are lots of other social factors. Your kids grow up and they get to their teen years and it turns out that their teeth are crooked. Well, you can afford to take them to the dentist and have them get braces and orthodontia work and so forth. And so they end up with beautiful teeth. My kids, by contrast, they grow up and they get to their teen years and they have crooked teeth. Well, I don't have the money to send them to the dentist to get them to have beautiful teeth, and so on. And so that then limits my children's likelihood of success in the social arena or anything that involves a certain amount of appearances as well. And then, of course, you're only interested in having your kids associate with and marry children of other people who have money. And my kids then feel excluded from the marital race in that particular way as well. Of course, there's also the fact that once you have a certain amount of capital built up, it's easier then for you to invest that money, and so you can go on and get more and more money. We are still stuck in low-paying jobs, and it's very hard for us to get ahead. We're living paycheck to paycheck, so to speak. And so what we have here is a situation where there is antagonism, certainly over money issues, over social hierarchy issues, and it only becomes more extreme. We've heard the saying that the rich then are able to get richer, and the poor get poorer. What we then get is a vicious cycle of all of this. The private property becomes concentrated in fewer hands, the competition becomes more intense. There's a sorting out among the winners themselves. They continue to compete against each other. Of course, there's an emerging middle class, but through the logic of this winner and loser competition, some of the middle class manage to claw their way up into the upper reaches of the bourgeoisie. Others make a mistake at some point and they get pushed down into the proletariat. And then over the course of several generations, the polarization between the classes and the antagonism between the classes becomes more and more extreme. Now, the Marxists then argue that the next thing that will happen necessarily is a revolution.